Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
We begin about a third of the way into the first Amud. The Gemara is discussing whether the mitzvah of matzah and maror today, when there's no carbon Pesach, is that a mitzvah d'oraisa or only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. We'll get to a Mishnah in the last line of the Amud, which will take us through the next Amud to the end of the daf and the Gemara on it. So the Gemara, first of all, discussing the fact that we have a pasuk which says you're supposed to eat the carbon Pesach al matzos umreirim yochluhu, or umatzos al umreirim yochluhu, depending if you're talking about Pesach Rishon or Pesach Sheni. Either way, it implies that the carbon Pesach is inextricably linked to matzah and maror, which would seem to indicate that only if you have a carbon Pesach in the time of the Beis HaMikdash do you have a mitzvah of matzah and maror d'oraisa. So the Gemara says it's a machlokes. According to Rava, matzah is d'oraisa bisman hazeh. According to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, matzah is only d'Rabbanan bisman hazeh. Everybody, however, agrees that maror is only d'Rabbanan bisman hazeh. The Gemara says, what's the difference? They are both in the same pasuk. Al matzos u'marim yachlu. The Gemara says, it's simple. Maror is not listed anywhere else, and therefore maror is clearly only dependent. It's only d'oraisa when there is a carbon pesach. Matzah, however, you have a different pasuk which says be'erev tachlu matzos. You should eat matzah. It repeats it, and therefore listed, and therefore Rava says it is a d'oraisa based on that pasuk over there. So he says, what does Rav Acha bar Yaakov going to do with that? He says that pasuk is not referring to the generations after the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. That's talking about where the Beis HaMikdash is still standing, and somebody is tameh, and therefore he's not bringing a carbon Pesach Rishon. He's going to bring Pesach Sheni. He needs a special pasuk to teach me that even though he's not bringing Pesach Rishon, it still has a mitzvah to eat matzah of Pesach Rishon, and that's why that pasuk is written. It has nothing to do with anything else. The Gemara says, well, what's Rava going to do with that? The Gemara says, no. Rava holds you do not need that pasuk to teach me that somebody who is bringing a Pesach Sheni still has to eat matzah on regular Pesach. I learned that from somewhere else. I learned that from the fact that somebody who has no bris milah, who is not allowed to eat carbon Pesach, still has a mitzvah to eat matzah. And therefore, if he has a mitzvah to eat matzah, there's also a mitzvah to eat matzah applying to somebody who's tamei and cannot eat from the carbon Pesach itself. Now, how do I know that somebody who has no bris milah still has a mitzvah to eat matzah? Because the pasuk says, "Kol ara lo yachal bai." Anybody who has an ara, meaning he doesn't have a bris milah, cannot eat of it. The carbon Pesach is it. That's what he cannot eat. However, he could eat the matzah, and therefore you do not need a pasuk for him, and you don't need a pasuk for somebody who is tamei and is going to bring Pesach Sheni. So what is Rav Acha bar Yaakov going to do? How come he has a pasuk special for Pesach Sheni? So Gemara says because he holds you cannot learn Aro and Pesach Sheni from each other. You cannot learn from one to the other. The person who has no bris milah, of course he has to eat matzah. I understand that he needs to eat the matzah because he's not going to have any Pesach Sheni. He's not going to have any other second opportunity. However, somebody who's tamei will be having a Pesach Sheni. Maybe he only has to eat matzah when he brings the Pesach Sheni. I didn't know that he has a mitzvah to eat matzah even in Pesach Rishon. He has a Pesach Sheni coming up soon. Therefore, we need an extra special pasuk to teach me the chiddush that he also has a mitzvah to eat matzah as well. Now, you could theoretically ask that the Torah could have just written that somebody who is bringing Pesach Sheni still has a mitzvah to eat matzah on Pesach Rishon, and I would know that somebody who has no bris milah also has a chiyuv to eat matzah on Pesach Rishon. The Rishonim explain, but we only said a pasuk once, and I would have assumed that it applies to the one who has no tashlum and the one who has no bris milah. I would not have assumed that it refers to the case of somebody who's tamei, and therefore I would have said that it is that the one who's tamei still is left out and does not have the mitzvah to eat matzah at all. Alright, now the Gemara says we bring a brisa which very clearly supports Rava. The brisa is discussing whether there is an obligation to eat matzah all 7 days of Pesach or not. And the Gemara quotes the pasuk Sheishis Yamim Tachal Matzah V'Yom Hashvi Atzeres. You should eat matzah for 6 days, and the 7th day is an additional day in which you should eat matzah. The Gemara says, why is that 7th day singled out? It's to tell you that the 7th day there's no mitzvah to eat the matzah, is just a rishus. Similarly, it's actually teaching you that the fact that it was singled out, that it applies, the same halacha applies to all 7 days. It is all just for sure, so you're allowed to eat matzah, then you don't have to actually have an obligation to eat matzah. Says the Gemara, so if that's so, you might think that the first day, meaning the first night, you also don't have to eat matzah. Gemara says no, that we know from a different pasuk that you do have to, because it says on matzahs umrarim yechlu. Says Gemara, that's only in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. How do you know if there's no Beis HaMikdash that there is still an obligation to eat matzah? You have the additional pasuk be'erev teichel matzos, and makes it an obligation for all time. And this is very clearly like Rava's halacha, that there is a mitzvah d'oraisa to eat matzah even when there is no Beis HaMikdash. This ends that Gemara and takes us to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses what happens if somebody or a group of people fall asleep in the middle of eating the carbon Pesach. Now the issue is that if they wake up later and they continue, it looks like they're eating in two separate places or two separate groups. Machlokes Rishonim if the issue is two places or two groups. Either way, we've seen earlier in the Masechta that it's forbidden to eat in two groups, the same carbon, or it's forbidden to eat in two places, and therefore it could be problematic. So to what extent is falling asleep a problem? So the Mishnah brings a Machlokes Tanaim. According to the Tanna Kama, it depends. According to the Tanna Kama, it depends on whether everybody falls asleep or just part of them fall asleep. If everybody falls asleep and then they wake up, now you can't continue because that's two groups. If part of them are awake, that's fine. According to Rabbi Yosi, no, even if it's only part of them, it's problematic. The difference is whether they actually fell asleep or they were just drifting off. If they were drifting off, they can continue. If, however, they literally fell asleep, even if it's only part of them, it is forbidden for them to continue. The Mishnah continues about another subject. He says, after the carbon Pesach becomes noisar, after it's left over, which the Mishnah calls chatzos, midnight, after that point, it is mitame. It makes you tummy, makes your hands tummy, and the Mishnah adds other types of psulim also make you tummy, and it quotes pigul together with noisar. Both of these are mitame your hands. Now the Gemara first of all begins and it says, what is the definition of drifting off? How do you define drifting off? Rabbi Yosi said it depends on whether you're drifting or you're sleeping. So Rav Ashi says drifting means you're not awake, you're not asleep, you're somewhere in the middle. And if they call to you, you'll be able to answer. But if they ask you to explain something, you won't be able to explain it. If they ask you to define something, you won't be able to define it. However, if they tell you a yes or no, is this the right explanation, you will be awake enough to be able to say yes or no. That much you are present over there. The Gemara quotes an incident. Abaye was sitting before Rabbah, and a Rabbah drifted off, and he was misnamnim, and Abaye said, is this called that you're drifting off and you're not allowed to continue to eat? So he said, no, I hold like Rabbi Yosi, as long as you're just drifting, it's still okay. If I would have fallen asleep, even though I'm only part of the group here, if I would have fallen asleep, I wouldn't be able to continue, but I just drifted, and therefore it's not a problem. I'm allowed to continue. Now, they didn't have Korban Pesach, they just had matzah, but the same halacha would apply, apparently. The Gemara now discusses how late we are allowed to eat the Korban Pesach, until what time in the night does it have to be finished. Now we had seen in the Mishnah that it says that by chatzais it already becomes nicer, it already becomes leftover and has to be burnt. So the Gemara says that is one opinion. That is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who says it has to be finished by chatzais, afterwards it's nicer. Rabbi Akiva says that the Torah allows you to eat it up until the morning. Now, the Rabbanan is supposed to finish it by chatzais, that's true, but it doesn't become nicer by chatzais, so you have up until the morning to eat it. And this is a repeat what we are about to see of a Gemara in the beginning of Maseches Brachos, which we have seen there. The Gemara works through the different approaches to learning out of the psukim, whether you have to be finished the Korban Pesach by chatzos, like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, or like Rabbi Akiva up until the morning. So the Gemara says depends how you read the following psukim. The Torah tells you that you have to eat it, and it has to be v'achlos habasar balayla hazeh. It says the words balayla hazeh. On the other hand, it tells you that you should eat it b'chipazon. You should eat it in a rush. So what do these two psukim mean? So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says balayla hazeh means that it has to be eaten on this night, and that means until chatzos. How do you know? Because it's linked with the words balayla hazeh to a different pasuk which says v'avarti b'aretz Mitzrayim balayla hazeh. Hashem says, I will pass through Mitzrayim on this night, and I will do makas b'charis. When is Hashem I'm passing through? That happened at midnight. It said that clearly b'chatzos alayla. So balayla hazeh, you see those two words balayla hazeh indicate until chatzos. Therefore, the Korban Pesach, which uses the words balayla hazeh, also has only until chatzos. Now, Rabbi Akiva disagrees with that, and Rabbi Akiva says, look at the word chipazon. The Torah says you have until chipazon to eat it. Chipazon is when they had to rush out of Mitzrayim. Chipazon means to be in a rush. Until they had to be in a rush and rush out of Mitzrayim, that is up until when they had to eat it, and that rush happened in the morning, because they left in the morning. Now, the Rashbam explains that Elazar ben Azariah is not bothered by that, because he says chipazon means when Mitzrayim was rushing around. When was Mitzrayim rushing around? That was chatzos, when everybody started dying. So that's what chipazon means. Now, what does Rabbi Akiva do with the phrase balayla hazeh? So Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva says the word balayla hazeh teach me that it has to be eaten this night. not earlier, and not later. Balayla means it has to be at night. You cannot eat it the day that you brought the carbon. You have to wait until nightfall. Most karbanos shlamim can be eaten during the day in which they're brought. You don't have to wait till the night. This one has to be balayla. Now Hazeh says that it's only this night. You cannot have the next night. You may think that it's also like a regular karban shlamim where you have the day and you have the next day and the light and you have the night in between. So here it's supposed to be eaten at night, so you should have the night and the next night and the day in between. When we say the day in between, does that mean you could eat it that day, or just that it doesn't become nicer that day? But either way, Rabbi Kiva says if it would only say to eat it at night, I would think that you are able to eat it this night and the next night. Therefore it says balayla hazeh, at night and only this night. Now Rav Elazar ben Azariah says you don't need a pasuk for that. It says that whatever's left over in the morning gets burnt. It says, obviously, you can't eat it the next night if in the morning you have to burn it. So Rabbi Kiva says, no. When it says burn it in the morning, I would have thought that means the second morning. You have 2 nights, and then the second morning you have to burn whatever's left over then after the second night. Rav Elazar ben Azariah says that's not a possibility. Whenever the Torah uses the word boiker around all of Torah, it always means one morning. It doesn't mean that there's a second morning involved, and that's the point over which they argue, and the rest of the drashos then play out. Now, the Gemara says that in our days, when we no longer have a carbon Pesach, the same halachas apply to the afikomen, the matzah which we eat instead of the carbon Pesach. According to Rav Elazar ben Azariah, it would have to be eaten by chatzos. The Gemara says, of course, obviously, why would I think that? So Gemara says, because as we learned earlier in the Perek, the mitzvah of matzah is a bit complex how it is linked to the mitzvah of the carbon Pesach itself. On the one hand, the Torah first says matzah and rom yachluhu, which links the two, and seems to say that whenever you are allowed to eat the carbon Pesach, you have to eat the matzah by the same rules. Then the Gemara takes it out of that hekesh, though, because the Gemara says that the Psukim say that you have 6 days that there's a chovas matzah, and then it says that Saras is the 7th day, and that's optional, and then we learn from there that all 7 days are optional, and then the Gemara says, but no, the first night is not optional, because we take it out of its being optional, because it says Ba'erev Teichel Matzos. So it comes out of the hekesh and goes back into the hekesh. So I would not know necessarily that all these halachas fully apply. I may think that when it goes that it was taken out of the hekesh, it's not exactly the same halachas as the carbon Pesach itself. The chiddush that the Gemara says here is that no, it has the same halachas as the carbon. It has to be finished by chatzos, because when it's put back into the hekesh, it's put back into the hekesh in time.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.